Something is right now happening that they don't want us to know about. Princess Anne, the most privately powerful royal in the family, has issued a huge ultimatum to her own brother, King Charles. Make me regent, or I publish everything. But the everything she is referring to, decades of royal secrets, private correspondence, and decisions made behind closed doors that could shake the monarchy to its foundation. While the world was watching Diana, then Meghan, then the slow collapse of Harry's relationship with the palace, almost nobody was watching Anne. And that is exactly how she wants it. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, is the second child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Born in 1950, she grew up in a royal household that was formal, disciplined, and emotionally cold by most accounts. But where her brothers Charles, Andrew, and Edward each stumbled publicly in their own dramatic ways, Anne never did, not once. She built her reputation quietly, deliberately, and with a level of strategic patience that most people in and around the palace did not fully appreciate until it was too late. She became the hardest working royal by pure statistics. In 2022, Anne carried out 214 official engagements, more than any other working member of the royal family, including the then Prince of Wales. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What the numbers don't show is the network Anne built over 5 decades of royal work, military connections, equestrian circles, Commonwealth relationships, charitable institutions. Anne didn't just attend events, she cultivated loyalty. She is Colonel-in-Chief of no fewer than 14 military regiments across the Commonwealth. Think about what that means. That is not ceremonial decoration. That is institutional reach across multiple continents, embedded over generations. She also survived something that would have broken most public figures entirely. In 1974, a gunman stopped her car on the Mall in London and attempted to kidnap her at gunpoint. Her response? She refused to get out of the car. She reportedly told the attacker, "Not bloody likely," and meant every word. The kidnapper was overpowered. Anne gave a statement to police and attended her scheduled engagement the same evening. That moment told you everything you needed to know about Princess Anne. She does not panic, she does not retreat, and she does not forget. Sources close to the royal household have described Anne as someone who keeps records, detailed, careful, long-running records of everything that happens around her. That detail becomes very important later, but first you need to understand what Anne has been quietly building toward and why the question of the regency is not as simple as it sounds. Before we go any further, what exactly is a regent and why would Anne want to become one? Because this is not just about a title, this is about power, real, constitutional, institutional power. A regent is the person appointed to act as monarch when the sovereign is unable to fulfill their duties. Under the Regency Act of 1937, if the monarch becomes incapacitated through illness, absence, or incapacity, a regent steps in and exercises the full powers of the crown. Not an advisor, not a figurehead, the full powers of the crown. Now here is where it gets complicated. Under the current legal framework, if King Charles III were to become too ill to reign, which, given his cancer diagnosis made public in February 2024, is not a hypothetical anyone can dismiss, the automatic regent would be Prince William. William is the heir. The succession is clear, but Anne is reportedly arguing that it should not be that simple. Sources suggest Anne's position is built on a very specific concern that William is not ready, not constitutionally unprepared, but strategically, institutionally, temperamentally unprepared for the weight of what a regency would actually require. Anne has watched William closely for decades. She has seen how he handles pressure, how he handles staff, how he handles conflict, and reportedly, she is not fully convinced. But there is another layer here that almost nobody is talking about. A regency for Anne would not just be about protecting the institution during Charles's illness, It would represent a fundamental repositioning of power within the royal family. It would place Anne, not Camilla, not William, not the courtiers at Buckingham Palace, at the absolute center of royal authority. And Anne, unlike almost every other senior royal, has never been at that center. She has always been adjacent to power. Influential, yes. Respected, absolutely, but never in control. The regency question is Anne's one realistic opportunity to change that, and reportedly, she knows it. What makes this even more extraordinary is what Anne is said to be willing to use as leverage to make it happen, because the secrets she is sitting on are not minor, they are not gossip, they are institutional. Here is something the palace has never wanted widely discussed. Anne has been inside almost every significant royal crisis of the last 50 years, not on the front pages, not giving interviews, but in the room, or close enough to the room that it made no difference. She was present during the slow unraveling of Charles and Diana's marriage, watching from the inside as the institution chose sides, managed narratives, and made decisions that would eventually destroy a woman the entire world loved. She was there during the Andrew crisis. She watched the palace's internal response to Harry and Meghan's departure, and reportedly had strong private views about how it was handled that she never made public. That restraint was not accidental. Anne is said to operate on a very particular principle. Information is only useful if you hold it at the right moment, and sources suggest that moment may now have arrived. What specifically does Anne know? Royal insiders have pointed to several areas. First, the handling of Diana. There are private communications, decisions, and institutional choices made during the 1990s that have never been fully disclosed publicly. Anne was close enough to the machinery of the palace during that period to have detailed knowledge of what was decided, by whom, and why. Second, the Andrew situation. The Duke of York's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the palace's internal response to it involved conversations and decisions at the highest level of the institution. Anne would have had visibility into at least part of that process. Third, and most sensitive of all, Charles himself. The years of Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, conducted while he was still married to Diana, involved a degree of palace awareness and management that has never been fully examined. Anne knew. She has always known. But then there is something even more specific that sources have begun to reference: private letters. The royal family has a long history of correspondence, formal, informal, personal, that is kept within the institution and rarely, if ever, surfaces publicly. And, as a senior royal with decades of access, is believed to hold or have knowledge of correspondence that touches on succession, personal conduct, and institutional decisions that would be deeply uncomfortable if they became public. The question is whether she would ever use them, and that is precisely what Charles is now being forced to consider. To understand why this ultimatum carries the weight it does, you need to understand the relationship between Charles and Anne, because it is not what the palace has always presented. These are not simply two siblings united by duty and shared history. They are two people who have spent decades navigating the same institution from very different positions, and who have not always agreed on how that institution should be run. Charles grew up as the heir. Every resource, every preparation, every institutional focus was directed toward him. Anne grew up watching that happen and building her own path entirely without that infrastructure. That dynamic created something, not open hostility. The British royal family does not do open hostility, but a quiet, sustained tension that people inside the palace have been aware of for years. Those who have worked closely with both siblings describe a relationship defined by mutual respect on the surface and genuine friction underneath. Anne has reportedly found Charles's management style frustrating. His tendency toward deliberation over action, his reliance on courtiers, his complicated relationship with public perception. Anne, by contrast, operates with a directness that has sometimes startled even senior palace officials. She says what she thinks. She expects results. She does not manage feelings, But then the dynamic shifted in a way nobody fully predicted. When Charles ascended to the throne in September 2022, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the balance of power within the family changed permanently. Suddenly, the brother Anne had watched struggle for decades was king, and Anne, for all her work, all her loyalty, all her institutional knowledge, remained exactly where she had always been, the Princess Royal, respected, decorated, adjacent. Sources suggest that the transition period following the Queen's death was harder for Anne than she has ever publicly acknowledged. Not because she wanted the throne, she has never shown any interest in succession itself, but because she watched an institution she had served for 50 years reorganize itself around her brother in ways that she felt did not always reflect the best interests of the monarchy. She reportedly raised concerns internally about staffing decisions, about the pace of modernization, about the handling of the Harry situation. Those concerns were noted, but they were not acted upon, and that, according to sources close to the situation, is the slow accumulation of frustration that eventually produced the ultimatum. Anne did not arrive at this moment impulsively. She arrived at it after decades of watching, waiting, and calculating exactly when her leverage would be at its maximum. That moment, sources say, is now. What happened next is the part of this story that the palace is most desperate to keep contained. According to sources familiar with the situation, the communication between Anne and Charles did not take the form of a single dramatic confrontation. It was more deliberate than that, more surgical. It began reportedly with Anne making her position on the regency known through private channels, not publicly, not through advisors, but directly. The message was straightforward. She believed that given Charles's health situation, the question of regency needed to be formally revisited, and she believed she was the right person for the role. Charles's initial response, sources suggest, was to treat the proposal as something to be managed rather than engaged with seriously, a mistake, because Anne's second communication was reportedly more direct. This time, the framing had changed. It was no longer simply a proposal. It was a position backed by the implicit understanding that Anne's continued public silence on a range of sensitive matters was connected in her mind to how seriously her concerns were being taken. Inside the palace, that communication reportedly caused significant alarm, not because anyone doubted Anne's loyalty to the institution in the abstract, but because those who understood what Anne actually knew and what she had access to understood immediately that this was not a bluff. Senior advisors were reportedly consulted, legal frameworks around the Regency Act were reviewed, and the question was asked, in the most careful institutional language possible, what would it actually take to make this problem go away? But then something shifted the situation further. Word of the exchange, or at least the outline of it, began to reach a small number of people outside the immediate palace circle. Journalists, insiders, people with their own reasons for watching the royal family closely. The palace's ability to contain the story began to narrow, and Charles found himself in a position that monarchs are specifically designed never to be in, publicly strong, privately pressured, facing a demand from within his own family that he could neither easily accept nor safely reject. To accept Anne's demand would be to bypass William, the heir, the future king, the person the entire succession plan is built around. To reject it too firmly risked precisely the kind of disclosure that the palace has spent decades trying to prevent. The institution was caught, and at the center of it all, Anne waited, calm, patient, certain that time, as it always had, was on her side. But what about William? Because this situation does not just affect Charles. If Anne's ultimatum succeeds, it is William who loses the most. A regency awarded to Anne would not remove William from the line of succession. He would still become king, but it would send a signal, loud, institutional, impossible to ignore, that the people closest to the monarchy's inner workings did not fully trust him to handle its most critical moments. That signal would follow him to the throne. Sources close to William describe him as acutely aware of the situation and deeply uncomfortable with it, not just because of what it means for his future authority, but because of the position it puts him in right now. William cannot publicly oppose Anne without appearing to put his own interests ahead of the institution. He cannot publicly support her without undermining his own claim to regency. So he is doing what the palace always does when it has no clean option. He is waiting, watching, and saying nothing publicly, but privately. Sources suggest William has made his views known to Charles directly. He is said to be frustrated, not with Anne personally, but with the situation that has been allowed to develop. William has spent years preparing for kingship with a particular understanding of how power would transfer, orderly, planned, on his terms and timeline. Anne's ultimatum has disrupted that understanding in a way he did not anticipate. But then there is a detail about William's position that makes this even more complicated. William and Anne have historically had a closer relationship than many people realize. She has been one of his most consistent supporters within the family, particularly during the difficult years following Diana's death, when the emotional landscape of the royal family was at its most fractured. He respects her. He trusts her judgment in a way he does not trust every senior royal around him, and that means his opposition to her regency bid, to whatever extent it exists, is genuinely conflicted. This is not William against Anne. This is William trapped between loyalty to Anne, loyalty to his own future, and loyalty to an institution that is asking him to be patient in a moment when patience is the hardest thing to maintain. So where does this all go? Because the palace cannot stay in this position indefinitely. There are three realistic outcomes to what is currently unfolding, and none of them are clean. The first outcome is that Charles finds a way to give Anne something, not the full regency, but a formal expansion of her constitutional role that satisfies her concerns without directly displacing William. This could take the form of a revised Councillors of State arrangement, expanding Anne's formal authority during periods when Charles is unable to carry out duties, without triggering the full legal framework of the Regency Act. It would be a political solution dressed in constitutional language. The palace is very good at those, but sources suggest Anne may not accept a partial measure. She has been patient for 50 years. She is not reportedly interested in half measures now. The second outcome is that Charles holds firm, refuses to alter the regency arrangements, and calls what he believes may be Anne's bluff. This is the highest risk option, because if Anne is not bluffing, and those who know her best suggest she rarely is, then the consequences of that decision could be historically significant. The release of private royal correspondence, or even the credible threat of it, would create a constitutional and media crisis unlike anything the modern monarchy has faced. It would make the Meghan and Harry situation look like a minor disagreement. The third outcome, and the one that several insiders believe is most likely, is a negotiated silence, not a formal resolution, not a public announcement, but a quiet understanding, brokered through intermediaries, in which Anne's concerns are addressed in ways that never become public, and the threat of disclosure is permanently diffused. The monarchy has survived for centuries, in large part because it is extraordinarily skilled at exactly this kind of invisible negotiation. It absorbs pressure. It makes concessions that are never recorded. It finds ways to satisfy competing interests without ever acknowledging that competing interests existed. But this situation is different in one important respect. The number of people who are now aware of the outline of what has happened is growing, and once a story reaches a certain number of people, the palace's ability to contain it shifts from certain to merely probable. The clock, sources suggest, is moving, and Charles, dealing simultaneously with his health, his son's impatience, his institution's stability, and his sister's ultimatum, is running out of easy options. Step back for a moment, because what this story is really about is not just one ultimatum between two siblings. It is about something much larger, It is about what happens to an institution built entirely on the appearance of unity when the people inside it stop pretending. The British monarchy has survived revolutions, wars, abdications and scandals that would have destroyed almost any other institution on earth. It has done so by maintaining one thing above all else, the image of a family that, whatever its private differences, presents a unified face to the world. Anne has spent her entire life protecting that image. More than Charles, more than Andrew, more than almost anyone else in the family, she has never written a memoir, never given a damaging interview, never allowed her private frustrations to become public theatre. That discipline, maintained over 5 decades, is precisely what makes her current position so extraordinary. Because a person who has kept every secret for 50 years and is now signaling she may not keep them forever is not someone who arrived at that position lightly. She is telling the institution something, not just Charles, the institution. She is telling it that loyalty, however long and however deep, has a limit, and that limit is connected in her mind to whether the institution treats her as the asset she has always been, or continues to manage her as a problem to be contained. The palace cannot answer that question publicly. It cannot acknowledge the ultimatum without making it real. It cannot deny it without risking the very disclosure it is trying to prevent. So it does what it always does. It says nothing, and it hopes that the story, like so many before it, quietly disappears before it becomes impossible to manage. But this one may be different, because Anne is different, and the monarchy, for the first time in a long time, is dealing with someone on the inside who understands its machinery as well as it understands itself. So here are the questions we want to leave you with today. Do you think Princess Anne is right to push for a formal role in the regency, or does this cross a line that even the most senior royals should not cross? Is Charles's position, dealing with illness while managing the institution's future, sustainable? And if Anne does have what sources suggest she has, does the public have a right to know? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I will read everything.